Under Commissioners' action items, 18-0588, request approval of the renovation of the front entrance of the Roswell Library with funding from the Library Board Bond Contingency Fund, sponsored by Commissioner Hauser.
Is there a motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a follow-up from our discussion about 30 days ago. We have now gotten the information that we requested and the assessment of what it would take to do this project, to provide a front entrance on the front of the building instead of the only entrance, which is at the back of the building currently. And as we discussed, there are other library branches in the system that also should be looked at for possible improvements with additional contingency fund dollars. So here is my motion. My motion is to approve option B, not to exceed $1.8 million for the Roswell Main Library renovation, and to review the libraries under renovation for additional needs funded by the Library Bond Contingency Fund.
I second the motion. It's moved and seconded. Commissioner Hall.
I just want to make sure what those libraries, those additional libraries are. What locations, can you speak to what they would be?
Well,
Where they're
can I tell you
located?
the intent of my motion is for all of
Well,
them
I
to be
know.
reviewed.
Yeah, I know. But I remember that in the last board meeting when this came up, Commissioner Arrington said there were libraries in his area, and Commissioner Darnell said there were libraries in her area that were being renovated inside the library, but the outside was not being looked at. So I just want to make sure that that is clear, that we will include all of those libraries.
That is the intent for
Okay.
them all to get a second look.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few points on this. One of the things that we did ask was that sort of the cost come back on this as we were evaluating it, and the cost figure that's come back is $1.8 million. The current budget for this library, I guess we bid out and we've got numbers on are $2.8 million. Is that correct, Mr. Collins? Thereabouts?
That is correct.
Right. So if we made this change, that'd be about a 62% increase in cost of the remodel. This library sits in my district, and while I do think that this particular modification would, do a lot for the aesthetics of this, a couple of things just to point out. It's a pretty high sum, and it just sort of bring everybody back to speed on this. We've got 23 library renovations plus a central library. This is in the first grouping. We've got sort of a tight budget that's been put together on all of these. I know I've spoken at length with my current member on the Board of Trustees, and he's got considerable background in construction, and he also lives up there in the North Fulton footprint, so as well, he's my nominee. And he's concerned about, where we are in terms of all the different needs that are cropping up that are sort of the basics. And when we set forth the renovations, correct me if I'm wrong, to the three gentlemen up here in front of me, the general basis of which goes into the renovations were modernizing the inside, technology upgrades, et cetera, addressing all of the facilities needs that came forth as a result of our Faithful Gould study. So it was done by an outside source. And those were sort of and the technological updates in terms of equipment and that sort of thing. Address ADA updates, roofs, HVAC, that sort of stuff. And what was not contemplated was major architectural changes to any of these libraries in terms of the renovation projects. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. So we went through a process. One of the things that was identified with this particular library was to have an entrance on the front. And there isn't, in the current design, it was approved and it's within the budget. There is an entrance on the front. It is aesthetically different. There's a sidewalk to the street, so it's not that there's no, what we've approved does not address the citizens' needs. What this would do, this would be a $1.8 million spend to alter the roof line, which would structurally change the library altogether. Is that correct?
Correct.
And while it's in my district, and I might like this, I've got a concern that this is outside of the process for which we adopted for all of these. And we start going down this path, one, we're not going to have enough funds to complete our renovations. We've got a contingency for a reason. We're at the front end of a lot of projects. And we don't know what those contingencies are going to be. And when you have a contingency fund, it's generally not designed to address aesthetic changes. It's designed to contest, to deal with contingencies, unexpected things that come up in the process. Fair statement?
Correct.
So, while this is in my footprint, I'm not going to be able to support it because I think it deviates from what we adopted as sort of a protocol at the front end of this process. In addition to that, we've already closed this library down, and we're ready to roll with this. And pulling this back would result in a pretty substantive, lengthy delay in which this library would be closed. So while I appreciate the intent in trying to look at and accommodate some of the concerns that were raised by a few citizens, not a lot, the cost figure on this is a prohibitive one. It's, in terms of investment, I look at this as sort of like, would I make this investment in my own house? And no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't recover that. And if I had additional funds to spend, probably wouldn't spend it on this, probably be on other aspects of the library first. So I think we went through a really good public process. We got a good design, and I encourage with us to stick with it. I think we're going to have a great final work product, and I just think that this particular cost that's associated with this change is a prohibitive one and a bad path for us to go down in terms of the whole renovation project. And I would just request that, colleagues, that we deny this request and move forward as planned on this particular project, and that we take a similar approach on any other projects in the future.
Commissioner Arrington?
Commissioner Houghton, what was your motion again? Because I think I missed it.
You're not paying attention to me? Let me read it for you. The motion is to approve option B, not to exceed $1.8 million for the Roswell Main Library improvements, and to review the other libraries under renovation for additional needs funded by the Library Bond Contingency Fund. To address, as a caveat to your question, what you raised and what other commissioners raised during our initial conversation about additional needs that were not addressed in the current program, along with this one. And these requests were made from the very beginning, so this is really not a new request. It just wasn't included in what was proposed.
Madam Attorney, would we need a change to the library master plan in order to do this? Since this is outside of the scope?
You can change the library, the master plan itself to make modifications of a particular library site. We changed the master plan, for example, if we were changing course from new construction to renovation or vice versa. But that's not what we have here.
Okay, well, I would rather see what the needs are or what the assessments are before allocating funds to any one branch. So I'm not going to be able to support this until I can see what the assessments are, or even, I don't even know if we have the funding to assess all of the other ones or where we are in that process. But to me, it wouldn't make sense to fund one and then try to find out what is needed for the other branches. To me, you find out what's needed and then you allocate from there. So I think it would be backwards to do that. So I'm not going to be able to support that motion.
Let me ask a question here while we're on this. The funding of it keeps coming up, and I recall before my sabbatical when I proposed building a brand-new, iconic, world-class central library, tearing down the existing one, which I still think was the right thing to do. But this board made a decision to renovate. And during that process, I had identified, and I think it's like Commissioner Darnell mentioned, institutional memory sometimes is good, and I brought up the fact that there was a Beltline TAD fund that had some $27 million in it, or projected to have some $27 million in it, that could be used for library purposes. Is that money still available? And I support this either way, but on the question of funding, even for the other libraries that have been mentioned, is that money still available?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. How much is in there now?
Hakeem, do you want to provide that?
Commissioner, it is about $9 million.
How much?
$9 million.
And that money can be used for library purposes, capital purposes, if I recall correctly, and this would qualify as another source. I mean, I'm supportive either way, but I'm just suggesting that that money is there, and 2 or 3 other libraries have been mentioned. That's just for information. Commissioner Houseman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's,
I just want to,
It's, one second.
Sure.
What's the actual account, Ms. Whitmore? It was a Beltline TAD money is what it was, but I'm not sure if that's the correct title.
I have the phone number. It's phone number 572.
Well, he was asking me for but it was the Beltline TAD money, right?
Yes, it's a TAD library.
Yes, sir. It's the pilot payments from the Beltline,
Okay.
out of the Beltline TAD.
And we have access to that. We're using some of that now. Last year, at some point, this board granted that authority to the library board. So the library board's in control of that TAD money now. And several months ago, when we needed some extra money to fulfill one of these projects, Al came over, we made a big presentation, and the library board moved some of that TAD money into one of these pots so we could get
Well,
the groups where we wanted them to be.
I understand that, but the money is available, is all I'm saying.
It is.
Okay. Commissioner Houseman, continue, sorry.
no, that's fine, that's fine. I just wanted to mention that the question was raised, why do this now? Because this project's already started. And if we're having to do some structural issues to the front and we don't do them now and we decide to do them later, then we have to close the building again a second time. So to me, that's not in the best interest of the community. If we're going to end up doing something anyway, it makes sense to do it all now. So I've got a host of reasons here I can give you. The circulation is the highest, one of the highest in the system, and what we're allocating per square foot for the current renovation is second to the lowest of our costs, third to the lowest. So I think that the resources that are allocated based on the usage are not really in line with what some of our other projects anyway. So I would strongly encourage us to do this. It does have a lot of support from the community. Community leaders have weighed in. I think you've all gotten some emails on that from these community leaders. And while it is not in my district, I do represent half of Roswell and had this in my district in a previous iteration of my service here to Fulton County. So I feel strongly that this is the right thing to do. It's a generational decision. I don't think we'll be making improvements to any of our libraries for another 25 or 30 years. I know I'm breaking your heart over there, Mr. Morley, but that's the reality. And so I strongly ask for your favorable consideration to this request with the spirit that we will take a second look at some other locations as well to make sure that we're addressing the needs of all of our library branches.
Commissioner Darnell?
I believe fairness is the issue. Fairness is the issue. I haven't heard an approach that would give some of the residents of Roswell what they want in terms of really the reconstruction of the library. And at the same time, be fair to all of the other branches that are in the system. I told my district, and other commissioners told their district that we had a process for design, civic engagement, funding. It was kind of a long process too, come to think of it. But finally, one day we went out there with the design and the funding, and bit by bit, they voted and they approved it. Now, I could go back if we were talking about a situation that was some kind of threat to life or safety. Aesthetics, I don't think so. I don't think so. Fairness. The issue in government these days, ladies and gentlemen, is equity. You talk to the most progressive counties in this country about health now, they talk about equity. They talk about gaps in your services. They talk about disparities. And I don't know how it may appear to folks sometimes, but we actually don't really deal that much in making differences among our services. We really don't. You want to know what it looks like at the Harriet G. Darnell Center? Drop by Dorothy Benson one day and see what that layout looks like. They're identical, except they have their neighborhood center attached to theirs. When you have your own money, when you're not regulated by the Constitution of the United States and the state of Georgia, when you haven't adopted local laws and ordinances that are to be applied every time we spend 1 penny of a tax dollar, and you can come back here and talk about what you want with your ceiling. Because I admit I was disappointed with Southwest being on the renovation list, because it's been on the renovation list for 20 years. I thought it was about time to be on the new list. But I took it out there. And I got to just mention one thing here. This is not on the same level, but I got to give weight to the district commissioner. That's the way we set up. We set up here. I'm not set up to go over to Nellie Hall's district and talk to a few people and come down here with an agenda. I can talk to Natalie, but I got to give her the respect. We know how these districts were drawn. They weren't drawn in good motive, but that's none of our business. None of us had anything to do with that. We got to start respecting district commissioners because they are the ones that are accountable. I'm not going over in Marvin Arrington's district holding meetings. He called me from Marvin's district. I'm going to call Darcia. Who I'm going to call? Oh, I'm sorry. The real commissioner of Marvin. I was talking about if you want to get something done. But anyway, fairness is the only thing. If there's any way I could do it is and be comfortable with that equity issue, I'd do it. Because nothing I enjoy more than hearing applause when you go into the district. I'm not going over in your district, though.
You're welcome anytime.
No, but my name went on the ballot up there. I can work with you. You and I can work together. District commissioner's not supporting it. That's just the way we operate around here, out of courtesy. And I could consider his inquiries to be quite relevant. Okay, I'm through.
Commissioner Hall.
I just want to make a note about the fact that we just attended Adams Park's library renovation meeting with the neighborhood, and I do have to say that the residents were very much in agreement that in order to have a library that's safe and inviting and looks like a library, that you had to have the outside renovated as well. Is that not correct, Gabe? Dr. Morley? And so that was my own personal experience into how the actual constituents see things. And that's what I'm here to do, is to actually vote for what the constituents want. Now, I did receive some emails from Roswell residents, and since that's not my district, I don't really know who they are or what level in the community they are, but I did receive some emails asking to please accept this resolution to improve the Roswell Library further. But I am very much about protocol and rules and regulations, and I do appreciate when the district commissioners' feelings are kept, are considered. So, thank you.
Commissioner Ellis?
Thanks for the comments. And just one thing, just to clarify, and maybe staff can sort of speak to this, but the key issue raised by the citizens was to have an entrance to street level, right? And that is contemplated in the design and in the renovation that's moving forward, correct? And so that, you know, that and I think there's been some level of confusion from some folks thinking that that's what was being brought up, but that's actually already in the design.
Right.
Correct.
This library was unique. My confirmation, all the other libraries had connections to the front, either by sidewalk to the street, and Al confirmed, we looked at during all the renovations, we're looking at connection to the street, correct, through sidewalks. This one was unique in the fact that the entrance was in the back. There was no entrance in the front. So that's where we worked with staff and also the community input about putting a front door, putting sidewalks to the front door, and the dormers came into play to add to the fact that this was a unique situation to get an entrance to the front, to the street, which we were evaluating in all the other libraries. So that's the clarification. This one is a unique situation.
So we have the entrance, we got the sidewalk connection.
Yes, correct.
There's a new vestibule doors. Vestibule doors, there's porch seating areas, ceiling fans, got more light coming in there. So it's going to be a substantive change to the front and the back of the building. We changed the entrance in the back use as well.
Correct.
In response to a lot of the concerns that were raised by the citizens. So the notion that, kind of the citizens they came out to express concerns, and those were contemplated within the design that's approved and was going forward. So, thank you.
All right, the motion on the floor is to approve. Let's vote, Madam Clerk.
And the vote is open. And the motion fails for lack of 4 affirmative votes, 3 yeas, 3 nays.
Oh, I'm sorry. I touched the screen.
Okay. Okay, which way are you voting?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so that motion passes.
Next item.
4 yeas, 3 nays.